My wife used our savings for her ex's bail, so I filed for divorce. I thought I knew my wife completely after 8 years of marriage. We had built what I believed was a solid foundation of trust, shared dreams, and mutual respect. Our small apartment wasn't much to look at, but it was ours. The savings account we'd been building together represented our future. A house, maybe kids, definitely security. That morning started like any other, with coffee and her scrolling through her phone while I got ready for work. The call came while I was in the shower. I heard her voice through the bathroom door, hushed and urgent. When I emerged, she was pacing the living room with tears streaming down her face. She told me her ex had been arrested for something serious and needed bail money. The amount she mentioned made my stomach drop. It was exactly what we had saved over the past 3 years. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every careful budget decision had led to that number. What happened next changed everything between us forever. She looked me straight in the eye and said she had already transferred the money. Not asked, not discussed, just done it. The joint account we'd built together was empty. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. The betrayal wasn't just about the money. It was about the complete disregard for our partnership, our future, everything we'd worked toward together. My hands shook as I logged into our banking app, hoping somehow she was wrong or exaggerating. The screen showed a balance of $37.62. Below that, a single transfer entry for the entire amount we'd accumulated. I stared at that number until my vision blurred. 3 years of sacrifice, gone in one morning without my knowledge or consent. The argument that followed was unlike anything we'd ever had. She defended her actions by saying he was the father of her child from a previous relationship, that she had no choice. I reminded her that we'd never had children together, that she'd never mentioned any previous children. The confusion on her face told me she wasn't thinking clearly. She meant he was family to her, had been important in her life before me. I packed a bag and went to stay with my brother across town. His guest room became my refuge while I tried to process what had happened. He listened without judgment as I explained the situation, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. His wife made extra coffee and quietly left us alone to talk. Having their support meant everything during those first few dark days. The legal papers felt heavy in my hands when I picked them up. My brother had recommended his attorney, someone who specialized in cases involving financial betrayal between spouses. The consultation revealed that what my wife had done wasn't technically illegal since it was a joint account, but it could be considered financial abuse in divorce proceedings. The attorney's matter-of-fact tone helped me understand that my feelings of violation were entirely justified. She called repeatedly over the next few days, alternating between apologies and anger. The voicemails ranged from tearful pleas for understanding to accusations that I was being selfish and unsupportive. I stopped listening to them after the fifth one. My brother suggested I change my number, but I wanted to see if she'd eventually realize the magnitude of what she'd done. Her sister contacted me through social media, asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, hoping maybe family could help bridge the gap that seemed to be widening every day. She chose a small cafe downtown where we'd met before during happier times. The conversation was awkward from the start. She tried to explain that my wife had been under enormous pressure, that the ex had threatened to take legal action against her for something from their past. The details she shared painted a picture I'd never seen before. Apparently, there had been ongoing legal issues stemming from their previous relationship, debts and obligations I knew nothing about. My wife had been dealing with this stress alone, afraid to tell me because she thought I wouldn't understand. Her sister's words made me realize how little I actually knew about my wife's past. But understanding her motivations didn't change what she'd done. The trust was broken, the partnership dissolved with that single transfer. I explained to her sister that while I felt sympathy for the situation, I couldn't continue in a marriage where major financial decisions were made without discussion. The hurt in her eyes reflected my own pain. My wife showed up at my brother's house the following week. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and clothes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. She begged me to come home, promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking, but I'd already made my decision. The divorce papers were served the next morning. I'd chosen to have them delivered while I was at work, unable to face her reaction in person. My brother texted me later that she'd called him crying, asking if there was anything she could do to change my mind. He told her gently that some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Since we had no children together and limited assets to divide, the proceedings were relatively straightforward. The irony wasn't lost on me that the savings account she'd emptied was now a central point of contention. Her attorney argued that she'd used the money for legitimate family reasons, while mine maintained it was financial misconduct. During one particularly difficult mediation session, she admitted that her ex had been arrested for domestic violence charges related to his current girlfriend. The bail money we'd saved had been used to free someone who'd hurt another woman. Learning this detail made me feel sick to my stomach. Our careful planning and sacrifice had enabled someone's potential continued harm. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday morning. I wore my best suit, the one she'd helped me pick out for job interviews 2 years earlier. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and clinical. She sat across the room with her attorney, occasionally glancing in my direction with what looked like regret. When the judge asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation, I felt a moment of doubt. 8 years of marriage, countless shared memories, inside jokes, and comfortable routines, all of it ending because of one terrible decision. But then I remembered that morning, the feeling of betrayal, the realization that the person I'd trusted most in the world had completely disregarded our partnership. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the small courtroom. We were no longer married, no longer partners, no longer building a future together. The savings account remained empty, a symbolic reminder of what we'd lost. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt both relief and profound sadness for what might have been. 6 months later, I learned through mutual friends that her ex had been arrested again while out on bail. The money we'd saved, the trust we'd destroyed, the marriage we'd ended, all of it had been for nothing. He'd continued his pattern of behavior, validating every doubt I'd had about her decision. I moved into a small apartment across town, far from the memories we'd built together. Starting over at 35 felt both daunting and liberating. The empty savings account slowly began to grow again, this time with only my contributions and my decisions. Every deposit felt like a small victory, a step toward rebuilding what had been lost. My brother helped me move my belongings, carefully packing items that held memories of our life together. Some things I kept, others I donated, and a few I simply threw away. The process was therapeutic in its own way, allowing me to physically separate from the past while mentally preparing for whatever came next. The divorce settlement awarded me half of what the savings account had contained before her fateful decision. It wasn't much, but it represented justice of a sort. Her attorney had fought the decision, arguing that the money had been used for legitimate family obligations. My attorney successfully demonstrated that the lack of communication and consent constituted financial misconduct. Late at night, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if she'd simply talked to me first. Would I have agreed to help her ex? Probably not, but at least we could have discussed it, found alternatives, maintained our partnership. The betrayal wasn't ultimately about the money. It was about the complete disregard for everything we'd built together. Dating again felt strange after so many years of marriage. The apps were confusing, the expectations different, and my trust severely damaged. I went on a few awkward coffee dates, shared abbreviated versions of my story, and watched potential partners' reactions carefully. Most were sympathetic but clearly concerned about getting involved with someone so recently divorced. The first woman I dated seriously was understanding about my situation. She'd been through her own divorce and recognized the signs of someone still healing. We took things slowly, building trust gradually through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. She never asked about my ex-wife's decision, sensing that some wounds were still too fresh to examine closely. My relationship with my brother deepened during this period. He'd been my anchor during the worst of it, providing practical support and emotional stability when everything else felt chaotic. His wife had welcomed me into their home without question, making space for my grief and confusion. Their marriage became a model for what healthy partnership looked like. The final twist came exactly 1 year after the divorce was finalized. My ex-wife's sister called to tell me that my former wife had been arrested for check fraud. Apparently, the financial pressure from her ex's legal troubles had driven her to make increasingly desperate decisions. The woman who'd sacrificed our marriage for someone else's bail had ended up in legal trouble herself. The irony was almost too much to process. She destroyed our relationship trying to help someone who'd shown no appreciation for her sacrifice. Now she was facing the consequences of choices that had spiraled completely out of control. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a deep sadness for the person I'd once loved and the life we'd shared. I chose not to visit her or offer help. The boundary I'd established during our divorce needed to remain intact. Her sister understood, though she seemed disappointed that I wouldn't intervene. Some bridges once burned leave only ashes behind. The woman who'd been my wife, my partner, my closest friend had become a stranger whose decisions I could no longer understand or support. Today, I'm engaged to someone who understands the importance of communication and shared decision-making. We keep separate savings accounts, but discuss every major purchase or financial decision together. Trust, I've learned, isn't just about faithfulness. It's about respecting your partner enough to include them in choices that affect both of your lives. The empty savings account from that morning serves as a reminder of what can be lost when trust is broken. But it also represents the beginning of my new life, one built on honest communication and mutual respect. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most important lessons about what we truly value in relationships.